I would like to call the school board meeting for Tuesday, January 7th, 2020 for the Des Moines Public Schools to order. Please take the roll. Terry Caldwell Johnson is calling in. That's why you're hearing the ringing.
Ms. Anderson?
No problem.
Here.
Mr. Barron?
Here.
Ms. Bradley?
Here.
Ms. Caldwell Johnson?
Here.
Mr. Cody?
Here.
Ms. Delagardelle?
Here.
Ms. Sawyer?
Here.
The first item of business is to approve the agenda. May I have a motion and a second to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second. We have a motion by Ms. Bradley and a second by Ms. Anderson. Please vote. Terry. I don't know. The vote is approved 6-0 with one abstention. The next item on our agenda is approval of the minutes for our previous meeting of December. I'm sorry, I didn't fill that in. December 3rd. May I have a motion and a second to approve the minutes?
Second.
We have a motion by Sawyer and a second by Bradley. Please vote. I think we actually need our vote reset. Thank you.
You need to vote again, Heather.
Oh, sorry. Terry? The vote is approved 6-0 with one abstention. Next item, do we have any district recognitions, Dr. Ahart? Not tonight, all right. The next item on the agenda is the consent items. We allow any person the opportunity to speak to the board for up to 5 minutes following the presentation of an agenda item. If anyone wishes to speak to an agenda item, please go to the information desk to sign up. Remarks must be germane to the agenda, and we ask that you avoid reference to personalities and character attacks, as those types of comments serve no productive purpose. We appreciate your input. As a reminder to the board and public, the board does not engage in discussion or deliberation with a speaker regarding comments made to the agenda items. Discussion and deliberation will remain among board members at the board table, with speakers' comments informing said discussion, deliberation, and determinations as deemed necessary. Kelly, do you have the motion?
I move that the board approve the consent items in accordance with the recommended action for each item on the consent agenda, including bills previously authorized, certified, and approved for payment by the board secretary in the amount of $9,354,585.51, and procurement and card transactions in the amount of $570,991.69.
Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion by Ms. Sawyer and a second by Mr. Barron. Any discussion? Please vote. Ms. Caldwell Johnson? The consent items are approved 6-0. Next, we have a public hearing. The public hearing will come to order. Is there anyone wishing to speak to item E1, public hearing for purchase of vacated Fremont Street right-of-way? Hearing no one, I'll close the public hearing. Superintendent Ahart, will you please introduce the matter?
I recommend the board hold a public hearing and approve the purchase of property from the city of Des Moines for no cost in accordance with Iowa Code 364.7, Section 3, following the public hearing. The 1.5 acre property is the vacated Fremont Street right-of-way between East 14th Street and East 15th Street, and vacated East 15th Street right-of-way between Fremont Street and University Avenue.
May I please have a motion and a second to approve the public hearing and the superintendent's recommendation?
Move approval. Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Barron and a second by Mr. Cody. Any questions or discussion? Please vote.
Yes.
She's back.
The vote is approved 7-0. Next, we have another public hearing. The public hearing will come to order. Is there anyone wishing to speak to item E2, public hearing for science room upgrades at Harding Middle School, Weeks Middle School, and North High School? Hearing no one, I'll close the public hearing. Superintendent Ahart, would you please introduce the matter?
I recommend the board review the proposed plans and specifications prepared by Studio Melee for science room upgrade to Harding Middle School, Weeks Middle School, and North High School, hold a public hearing, and approve the plans.
May I please have a motion and a second to approve the public hearing and the superintendent's recommendation?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion by Ms. Anderson and a second by Mr. Barron. Any questions or discussion? Please vote.
Yes.
The vote is approved 7-0. We have one final public hearing. The public hearing will come to order. Is there anyone wishing to speak to item E3, public hearing for replacement of concession stand at East High School, Williams Field? Hearing no one, I'll close the public hearing. Superintendent Ahart, would you please introduce the matter?
I recommend the board review the proposed plans and specifications prepared by RDG Planning and Design for the replacement of a concession stand at East High School, Williams Field, hold a public hearing, and approve the plans.
May I please have a motion and a second to approve the public hearing and the superintendent's recommendation?
I move approval. Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Barron and a second by Mr. Cody. Any questions or discussion? Please vote.
Yes.
The vote is approved 7-0. The next item on our agenda is our item F1, our monitor report on third grade reading part 1, all students. Superintendent, I will turn it over to you for introduction.
Good evening. I have one of our principal supervisors, middle school elementary principal supervisor Barry Jones, and former principal in the district, and Kelly Schofield, our elementary director of teaching and learning, also a former elementary principal in the district. This is the first report on the all-student third grade reading SMART goal. It's the second report on any of our SMART goals. And so this report, in some respects, will look very similar to the last one for third grade reading for Black males, but obviously will cover the entire span. So you will see some similar themes, although the numbers will look a little bit different. And we also have a video. The last report that we shared, we gave some more background than we normally would on the assessment, so that there's some better background information on how we're measuring progress. This presentation will include a video that was produced to help illustrate what's happening in the classroom at the elementary level to address our student needs. So with that, I will turn things over to Kelly.
Good evening, Board. Tonight we are presenting on our Board Goal 1. The percent of all third grade students on track in reading will increase from 52% to 72% by June 2023 as measured by FAST. I just wanted to briefly review, I know we touched on this quite a bit at our last, when we presented last, but the FAST test stands for the Formative Assessment System for Teachers, and it measures the components of foundational skills that we teach during our foundational skills block, and it has several sub-tests that you see on the FAST assessment side that we talked about the previous time I was here, and that those targets move. So that would be the same for all students that it was for our Black male population, that the target will, it increases as the year goes on. Hopefully we'll be able to pull up our dashboard tonight. The public-facing dashboard is now on our website under the board tab. If you go to the DMPS school website and click on the board tab, you'll see a a link for board goals, and if you click on that, then you're able to get to the different board goals and the different dashboards that go with those. So as you can see, the data is there for our third grade students year over year with the goals moving forward, and we have data for our our kindergarten, first, and second grade students as well. To just kind of bring your attention to some of the data points that you're seeing there. Try not to touch that. That you'll notice that our third grade students are a little bit lower than they were coming in from the fall of last year. So our fall of last year data for our third grade students, for all students, is about 5 percentage points less than it was the fall coming in last year. And we also made some drops from fall to fall in first grade and in second grade in that fall data. Do you have any questions about the dashboard itself, or? If we scroll down, you can see the percent, and I'll talk a little bit more about the data there, but as you scroll down, you can see the percent of students that are not meeting benchmark who are being progress monitored on CBM reading. And we know that all students that are at risk or persistently at risk based on from the state guidelines should be progress monitored and should be receiving an intervention. So our first grade numbers, the same as it was with the Black Male Report, our first grade numbers are low. You see that it's 64.6% of those students are actually being progress monitored, but they're being progress monitored on the CBM reading. That 64% is being progress monitored on CBM reading. That's what we pull for this monitoring report, because that's the state suggested assessment that we use to progress monitor, because it's more robust than some of the others. But many teachers, when you're starting out in the fall, if their students are below grade level, they want to drill down and get it at a deficit skill. So they may be doing an intervention in blending or segmenting, or a phonics intervention that they would use nonsense words progress monitoring for, or a sight word progress monitoring for. So when we look at progress monitoring overall, there's about 95%, 96% roughly of our first grade students that are being progress monitored on some type of measure that should be progress monitored, but only 64% on that CBM reading. That's going to increase after this winter benchmarking, because we are really working with schools and teachers to move those students over to that CBM reading progress monitoring. So you're going to see a big jump in the number of students that are getting that progress monitoring. And the only reason that we would recommend that a student not get that was if they are taking the assessment and they're like lower than 10 words per minute. So then we would monitor them off of that. So that might make up for some of that. And you can see in second and third grade that we do have close to 100% of our students being progress monitored. So then we'll move just to summarize some of the data. So I said before that overall our third grade students were down from last fall, but if you look year over year from 2016 to 2019, we're up a couple of percentage points in the number of students that are meeting that reading readiness benchmark. In kindergarten, we're up a few 2.6% from fall of 2016, but in first grade, we took a large drop there, and that's an area that we're really working with teachers and building leaders to drill down into that first grade data and look at what's going on in those classrooms to see, because we tend to go up and down. As you can see, if you look at the data from the dashboard, it kind of goes up and down each year, so we're really trying to work on that. And then second grade went down as well from fall to fall. And then we talked a little bit about the progress monitoring previously when we were looking at the dashboard. And we know the goal is to get 100% of our students' progress monitored, so it's really us looking at it, helping our building leaders know how to find that, how to look at that, the coaches, and so that we're all helping get the teachers and the students into FastBridge to be progress monitor, but really mostly is about getting the interventions. Like, we want to progress monitor them, but we're trying to move past the compliance piece of that and buildings feeling like they're doing it out of compliance for the state, but getting to where we understand that we're giving them an intervention or getting them the help they need, and this progress monitoring is helping us know if they're moving towards their goal. So we're really doing a lot more around that and a lot more work with the schools on that. And our response to data stays the same, just really working with that understanding of teaching reading, high quality curriculum materials. So we have materials that we talked about at the previous board meeting in both our foundational block, but also in our literacy block, ELA literacy block overall. And then we are supporting 12 of our elementary schools more intensely with having support people from the district in those buildings more often.
When do you want to share the video?
Yeah.
You want to do that now?
Yep, we'll go ahead and share the video with you. You may have some questions after that. This is a video that highlights our new EL curriculum. And
Can you not use the acronym?
it is EL education curriculum. Okay. So it is the acronym as part of the name. So it comes from EL education. And this is the curriculum that we put in place, K-5. We've implemented K-5 in our ELA literacy. And then some of our schools are also using the EL skills block materials in their foundational block. But this is going to give you an insight into the classroom, and then some insight from some teachers that are using it as well.
We studied the human rights throughout this whole unit, and so they were able to connect current events with human rights being violated and how this connects to Esperanza Rising.
Going out and doing observations in classrooms across the district, we were seeing a disparity across schools, sometimes across grade levels, as to which students and how students were getting access to high quality, complex grade level instruction. So we wanted to ensure that students were having an equitable experience across the district. We wanted a curriculum that met the standards, of course, and the shifts in the core, which would mean that work around complex text, speaking, listening, writing, and reading around evidence from text, and building background knowledge and vocabulary. So it needed to address that. We wanted it to have a strong writing component, and we wanted it to have some research behind it. So we chose the EL curriculum because it does meet all of those things, and it also is one of the highest rated curriculums from Ed Reports and some other districts that chose that curriculum.
So it's no longer in the mindset where we're just taking a standard and teaching to that for a week or two and then moving on.
Because those skills all should be meshing anyway. They're not all separate entities.
Right. My students can even see the progression of why we took notes and graphic organizers on this character, so then at the end it made the writing piece easier. And I feel like the amount of writing they're producing is way better than even what my students last year did at the end of the year. And the quality is just amazing.
When I look at what fifth grade's doing in that first module, I can directly see how my first module in second grade is going to build directly into that.
Our school, being with LSI and Schools of Rigor, we were working so much on group work and getting the kids to be more independent learners and helping each other, and EL fits right into that. And so that was very exciting for me. It supported all of our work that we've been doing the last couple of years. They just meshed really nicely.
Themes and the units are different grade level to grade level. A lot of the components and protocols are the same.
Let's do this with fidelity, and because I think by the time then they get to us in fifth grade, there's the power. They've had all of this stuff all along so that they really can be very independent by the time they get to fifth grade with a lot of the things that they're doing.
We could have a student go to a different school or possibly even 2 schools in a year and hear the same vocabulary.
I like that it's centered around a central question or a central idea, because that consistency carries through and you can practice so many different skills within a topic and they know what to expect, and they know they're going to build their knowledge on that topic.
So some of the research that's out there around not just the text being diverse and culture responsive, but the practices and the instructional strategies that we're using are also culturally responsive.
About 3,800 students are from K through 5 in terms of English language learner services. So students don't come to us with nothing. They're not a blank slate. They've got experiences, they've got background knowledge on all aspects of our daily world. And so if we can figure out a way to make those connections with our students, that just helps us move them further along than we would have otherwise.
Many of my students were able to have conversations about their experiences from the countries that they came from.
Yeah, my students have even carried over the human rights and social justice
Yes.
piece into the rainforest conversations
cool.
about the people who live there, and we should look up who they are and make sure their human rights aren't being violated by the rainforest being cut down. And so that's such a big connection that
It is.
you wouldn't think 10 and 11-year-olds can make, but they
They definitely make the leap. And
Yeah.
I think that this curriculum is showing us as educators, like, we need to provide this opportunity for them to really reach for this because they
Exactly.
can.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
it's practice for when they're adults, they can be informed citizens
Yeah,
too. I
right.
think it's awesome.
And the other things we were looking for was the social emotional learning, because that is one of our, another initiative and one of our board goals, that be embedded into the curriculum, and this one has that.
I've seen an increase in empathy,
Yeah. Yes.
huge increase in empathy with my students, and that's important to me.
And a true understanding of it.
And say, okay, in our conversation, we're going to talk about, are we behaving like ethical people today?
The other thing that I like about this curriculum is it touts the assets that all students bring.
So you'll hear teachers talk about scaffolds. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about those supports that are built in or that are instructional moves that teachers use to ensure that all students, no matter what their language level is or their instructional level, are able to engage in that complex text, the complex ideas, and the discussion around that. So those scaffolds and those supports are built right into the curriculum.
Every single student is able to access that material and that curriculum in a way that's appropriate for them. I group my kids a different way almost every day. From that standpoint, it has leveled the playing field that all of my students get access to the grade level material.
And we're seeing that students that normally may have been pulled out of a classroom for different instruction or been overly supported or heavily supported are able to interact with this, with the text and with the ideas and with the discussion, and even in the student outputs, the writing or the outputs that students are doing, they're able to do that at grade level with these supports.
And some heavy duty topics. I mean, Universal Declaration of Human Rights,
Yeah.
that's pretty heavy and it's heavy lifting. I have a student, she's a struggling learner, and the way she's been able to participate and have these conversations, and I sat with her and watched her work on her monologue, and she's got such amazing thoughts, and she wouldn't have had that had we not done it the way that it was laid out in EL.
We're going to give them higher level content right now. We're going to figure out a way to support them on their way as much as they need or as little as they need. I think that's a win for our kids.
So moving forward, we want to continue to support schools in their implementation of the EL curriculum, because we do know that is the way that our students are going to get to those shifts in the core and that equitable experience across our district.
Just from my own personal connection and networks, the educators that I interact with have said nothing but great things about this curriculum and have seen amazing results. I think the same will happen for us and even more.
Gives you a little peek into our classrooms. I don't know if Barry, you want to add anything?
The writing, the purposeful writing and the amount of writing is so impressive. This fall, when we were doing some rigor walks, everybody, when we select classrooms, wanted to go in during literacy time. And by the time I was visiting classrooms every day that week, I thought about the mobility and the high interest as far as the writing of, I could track the second grade lessons when they were talking about the different types of schools and the high interest and the amount of writing. And then also in fifth grade with in the video when they talk about human rights, the interest in the conversations was impressive, and I think the word integrity and seeing, I applaud our teachers for taking all this time to roll it out successfully, and then also seeing the excitement in the student evidence, because that's ultimately what we want to see, and that's our students excited, engaged, and interested in the topics that they're reading and learning about. Thanks, Bear.
Okay, before I open the floor for discussion, may I have a motion and a second to approve item F1, the monitoring report for all students, third grade reading part 1?
I move approval.
Second.
All right, we have a motion by Barron and a second by Ms. Bradley. So now, are there any discussion, or does anyone have any questions? Mr. Cody?
Excuse me. You said the curriculum just was implemented this year, correct?
Yes.
And in the past, was there a uniform curriculum or was it kind of patchwork?
We had a curriculum that was adopted by the district about 5 years ago. It no longer meets the Common Core standards, but it was used, I would say, more patchwork. We've tried to roll this one out with the idea of that equity across. So because our previous one, because it didn't match, started not to match the standards, we were having to pull in lots of other things to do that. So we have had a curriculum in the past. This is a more comprehensive curriculum with a more teacher-embedded instructional strategies in it, also scaffolds for students. So it's a little bit more comprehensive than what we've had in the past.
And much more culturally responsive as well.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And then that embedded piece with the social emotional learning was really key for us choosing.
And is this a universal rollout or is it being phased in or how's that looking?
Well, it's an implementation year, so I think if you went into the schools, they're working it's universally being rolled out. Schools are in different places.
Each school has it, is what I'm trying to ask.
Every school has it, yes.
Okay.
Every school has it K-5, have the material, the teacher materials and the student text, K-5.
Yep, well, this isn't really a pertinent question, given that, but I noticed that in the historical data there was a big drop in every grade between first and second grade. Do we have any idea what might have caused that? Hopefully this new curriculum irons this out, but.
Yeah, you mean from like fall of
fall
to spring?
to fall to fall
Fall
as
to
going
fall,
by.
right, yeah. Yeah, that is true every year, and we try to kind of figure out why that is. And we do know that we end in most of our schools and most of our grade levels, kindergarten ends fairly high, which gives us a little bit of false positive because they're dropping then in first grade. So we are practicing those skills, but we're not getting them to automaticity, so it's causing us to drop in first. So haven't really been able to pinpoint an exact reason why it's dropping more each year. But we're hoping that by not just focusing on the foundational skill piece, the skills, which is important, we needed to firm that up and get that in place, but now connecting it to rich text, where students are getting opportunities to read, and it's around social studies and science. So the things that they're super interested in, that's gonna help us, because in first grade, we gotta get them reading more.
Yeah, well, and I guess
writing.
one thing that I'm going to be keeping my eye on was that big drop seems to be from first to second. And so it is a downward thing, but it's a drop from first to second. So I'm curious what the disconnect might be.
Yeah, so I think we feel, just based on the subtests that we analyze at the end of the year, where we are falling short is the CBM reading, so that reading fluency. They're doing well on the subtest, but not as high on that CBM reading. So then they're not keeping those skills, and they're falling, like over the summer, they haven't really mastered those skills. So when they're coming back in the second grade, they were weak skills at the end of first grade, if they even had them, and then we're losing that over the summer. So we're hoping by adding more text and more work around literacy and reading, writing, and speaking, that's going to help bring those first grade scores up to the end that are more solid. And then we won't see that big drop. We're hoping that's
Well, yeah,
our goal, and to be more
definitely.
comprehensive.
Right on, thank you.
Mr. Barron?
Dr. Ahart,
Mhm.
and my question's about the evaluation of the board monitoring report. There is not one on this one, and
No, there is not one. Kirsten and I had a brief email conversation about this. If we had the new nomenclature that we had discussed at our work session on Saturday, I would have chosen not applicable, because while technically, I guess you could call this report in compliance, since it's just reporting baseline data, it doesn't really speak to progress toward the goal. So that's why I didn't put compliant on there per our discussion on Saturday. If I'm forced to do compliant or non-compliant, I would definitely say compliant, because I do believe it contains everything the monitoring report is supposed to monitor. But since it's not really a measure of progress, because it's the baseline data for the year, I left that off.
thank you.
That makes sense. Yep.
Any other questions, or? Okay, I have just a,
This is Terry. Thanks,
oh,
Rob,
yep,
for asking
Terry.
that. Thank you, Rob, for asking that. That was going to be my exact question. And just to that point, I can't recall if we clarified, Tom, when we thought we would be able to sort of perfect the ranking or rating that we discussed on Saturday, so that they could actually be applied on monitoring reports. So should we expect to get that here in the next 30 days, or?
Yes, within the next 30 days. I had suggested that I would have something to share with the board prior to the first February meeting.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sure.
Does anyone have any other questions, or?
I will if
Okay, yeah, go ahead, Rob.
Because the points that Kaylin raised about, you know, the kind of the melt from the end of one year to the beginning of the next over the summer is on my mind too, and it's every transition, you know, and to a certain degree, I guess I expect that. So I'm curious, are you prepared to kind of discuss if we're going to do anything different, if we're going to offer anything differently over the summer, or you know, are we going to look for any additional community partnerships that over the long game could help us with the right focus from our curriculum experts, try and maintain some of that?
That's a really great question. We have been having those discussions, and one where we're at right now is thinking of using the community partners we already have that are serving students over the summer this summer, and working to better design curriculum for those summer programming that matches what we're doing in the classroom. So it can preview and review, preview the vocabulary for the students for the coming school year, and review those skills, not just in the foundational skills, but also in math, so that we're able to do that. So we wanted to think this year about starting smaller with the community groups we already have and the student groups we have coming in over the summer, and writing that programming and working with the teachers and training them on that, and hopefully grow from there.
Another thing that we're trying to do, not as impactful, but I think will make a difference, is if you look at this year's calendar versus last year's calendar, and then the next year's calendar, which was approved a couple of months ago, you'll notice that summer is shrinking a little bit. So we intend to keep creeping up on that mark where we can't cross to become year-round schools, because we cannot become a year-round school district-wide because the state prohibits that at the high school level. Our previous experience shows that we're much more successful if all of our schools are on the same calendar. So we're looking at ways that we can, within the state guidelines, expand the year, not necessarily add days, but lessen that big gap in the summertime, which is a challenge everywhere, but certainly for those struggling readers, it's even more important to shrink that learning loss time.
Yeah, I just have a couple things. One of the things that I really appreciated as a librarian is the joy that those students had in sharing their reading and writing. And so I'm glad to hear, and even some of the titles that are mentioned are some that I know are, so that is good. I'm glad that, you know, we invested in a curriculum that provides those rich opportunities for kids. I wanted to go back just very briefly to clarify something. When you said that we want to have 100% progress monitoring, do you mean we want to progress monitor every single student or every student who's not meeting fast?
Sorry for the
No, it's okay. I just wanted to clarify.
We want to, students that have a designation of at-risk or persistently at-risk, we want to be giving interventions to 100% of those students and progress monitoring 100% of those students.
Okay, just because I think the chart was also students who hadn't met fast, so I just wanted to clarify to make sure.
So that they're not meeting fast.
Yep.
For 2 years in a row, they get that at-risk status and the persistently at-risk status.
Yeah, and I had also, in my questions to you, Tom, I had dug in quite a bit, and I'm not sure, I think you had sent that out to the board this afternoon, so I'm not sure if everyone had gotten a chance to look at it, so I just want to give us a chance to kind of go over it just briefly again. We talked a little bit about first grade, and I had kind of asked you, you know, what was, you know, really kind of unique about first grade for this year, and I think your answer was largely, this is fairly typical of kind of what we we see. And so, oh, sorry, I just kind of lost my, that we do see that fluctuation in our foundational skills. What is working really well in some of the places where kids seem to be really retaining foundational skills, and how is that being, you know, recognized, or how can we leverage that, I guess?
Right. So we both our curriculum department and the principal supervisors together are really working to help our supporting buildings in looking at their data, grade level and school-wide, but individual teachers, and seeing and addressing that variance among teachers, because that is where you see that. You have a teacher that has very high percentage of students that are meeting that benchmark, and then maybe one in the same grade level at the same school that's not as high. So we've really been trying to get them to look at data down to that classroom level and then to the student level. So looking at practices and the teachers in the foundational block that are making the most progress are those that have the very tight routines, for not just for the instructional practices, but for the climate of their school and routines and expectations. They're following the 5 components. They are giving grade level instruction as well as backfilling, and having an ample amount of time for practice and automaticity using those decodable readers and other types of reading that work on those specific skills. And the pace is going. And when we see that, it almost always transfers to student achievement. And so getting teachers into each other's classrooms, we've worked with our curriculum department to get building principals going into each other's schools to see some of those practices happening, so they know that this is what this looks like. We're making videos of some of those routines, so principals know that, okay, it is slow. We need to move it.
And another opportunity is our leaders are expected to be experts in everything. So I appreciate curriculum setting up some workshops for our principals to deepen their understanding on how they lead it, they support it, and how they monitor it. And today, as we shared the dashboard with principals, our focus today was sharing some of those best practices and next steps. And, you know, I know all the way from the boardroom down to the classroom, I think the most important piece is, too, how we get students to track their own progress and learning, because that's the mindset of children, is having a goal they want to attain, and how do we not only track as teachers, as grade levels, and as a school, but how can we shift that to students also, being very in tune with tracking their progress, reflecting on it, setting goals, and then also allows us opportunities to celebrate that success if we can get that all the way down to the student level. So.
Yeah, there's that efficacy definitely in the self-tracking. And one thing that I wanted to raise up too, and I might be inference jumping a little bit too much, but from what you're describing, it sounds like the teachers who are potentially thriving are probably mostly our veteran, more experienced teachers who've kind of been in and around for a while, who are, you know, kind of content experts across all fields. This is one thing, as someone who comes from a secondary background, that always amazes me, is just how our elementary teachers are you know, continuing to gain that context knowledge and expertise. So what kind of supports are we providing then for, you know, our teachers that are new to the district or very early career teachers who are trying to kind of jump in midstream on all of those things that you mentioned?
That's a really good point. And where we have teachers who have a strong background or have had either coursework or training in the teaching of reading, like the science of reading, that's another, you can tell that when you go into the classroom, because they not only know the moves and the pacing and the you know, the materials they should be using, but they know immediately how to give that corrective feedback and do that like sort of that backfill loop. And also, if you have a coach in the building who has that really strong background, or an interventionist who has that really strong reading background, you'll see some pockets there that have more improvement in the scores. So that's one part of the answer. But to try to to support all teachers, we offer some optional, very intensive early literacy training that goes throughout the year. It's like 40 hours, and it really is focused on that reading. And we've done it for this is our third year, and there's like 45 teachers in it each time. They enjoy that. We also focus on that in our coaches training and in our leader training, so that they can also continue to improve in those skills. And we're looking for ways to get more to the teacher level in our K-1 classrooms, especially. Like, how can we get that learning to all the teachers to have that baseline? So that's an area that we have some things in place, but we also know that we need to do more.
Okay. And then Dr. Ahart, how might we see the budget impacted, kind of based on the work that's happening surrounding the school?
Well, I don't really have an answer to that right now. We're exploring a number of ideas. As the board knows, we've been doing these community-based problem-solving meetings around each of our SMART goals. And so we still have the final one of those meetings coming up next week. And then we're going to process all of that information and use the input and ideas that our community brought to the table to craft a more comprehensive strategy. And then you will see that reflected in the budget.
Okay. And I'm sorry, I jumped ahead, and I want to go just back very briefly. One of the things that I've been thinking a lot about in light of our math goal and also our literacy goal is that the foundational skills for these really happens in early elementary. And so we're expecting quite a bit from our teachers in terms of, you know, the pedagogy that they have to teach reading, but also the pedagogy and the deep math knowledge that they need, you know, to get our kids to where they need to be for algebra by 9th grade. Like, they've got to have those foundational skills coming out of elementary. So I think this is a little bit beyond this, but I think it's still related to our goals. How are we working to balance both of those expectations for our teachers? Because I imagine under an unintended consequence or an unintended, you know, impact of these goals could be that I think our teachers are going to feel this, right? That there's a lot of pressure to get their students to perform high. So how are we going to kind of balance all of that while still, you know, ensuring we get to our goals?
That's a really good question. So the teachers, it is a heavy lift. It's a heavy lift all the way up. The curriculum's a heavy lift, the new EL curriculum, continuing to improve their foundational knowledge and their skills. Our teachers are great. They're super reflective, and they know that that they may have gaps also in their knowledge, and to even to teach these foundational skills, right? So we don't want to overload them. We've tried to focus more on literacy for the past few years. We've added that more content literacy this year in K-1 to make it more of a connected and a holistic literacy experience. But we're also we're going into to schools and giving them some small routines that they can do, number sense routines, counting collections, some problem solving and task-based work. And that's K-5, but especially in our K-1, some small routines, 10, 15-minute things they could do in their math class versus we need you to do all of these things. Here's one thing that you can do if you did it every day, how that's going to change their flexibility, students' flexibility of number, their algebraic thinking. So we've trying to target those things towards that algebraic thinking and those algebraic processes, but going at it in a smaller doses. And different schools are at different levels, so we're able to get into and add more math. And as we move forward, that's kind of how we'll do the balance. That when schools are feeling good in the ELA, then we'll move to give more comprehensive support around math.
I'd also note that we've been really intentional the last several years in ensuring that pre-K is not just a one-off. You know, that we're really working, and Susie Guest has done a wonderful job with this. I'm speaking in her absence, didn't think of her being here, but of making sure that what our pre-K classrooms are doing is aligning to what our expectations are in kindergarten, so that helps bridge some of those gaps too, both in reading and in math.
Our curriculum coordinators meet with the coaches from the preschool regularly, and they collaborate.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Barron.
Kirsten, I have one other quick question. Sorry.
Go ahead, Terry.
So, just a couple of things. I want to lift up something that Rob, excuse me, and Kaylin talked about specifically relative to the changes that we're seeing, especially transitioning from spring back to fall. And I see on the response to the data that we are providing intense support to 12 elementary schools. I guess my question is, number one, do we have any alignment between those 12 schools and schools that are actually part of the 21st Century program, where we have in the after-school setting an opportunity to provide some more intensive, academic support in the after-school setting, number one. And then secondly, I know that typically the district aligns their 21st Century programs with the academic year, but there is an opportunity to align those to a combination academic year and then out of school time, whether that's spring break, winter break, professional development days, or in particular summer. And is there any thought about maybe rethinking our paradigm relative to how we actually utilize the 21st Century opportunity, which is multi-millions of dollars from the State Department of Ed that comes into our district for after school, and aligning that back to creating more summer opportunities? So a couple pieces to that question.
Was the question what, I guess we are working with schools and those organizations around the 21st Century to with their after-school programming to try to align some of the skills and the vocabulary, some of the instruction that would help support the students during the day. So that's one part of it. And then you were talking about, I believe you asked, are we also looking at that as far as like expanding it or changing our ideas around that and maybe adding or enhancing it through some summer learning? Was that the question?
Yeah, and specifically aligned to the 12 elementary schools where there appears to be a need for intense support.
Right, and we haven't done that specifically with that 21st Century. But some of those schools do have that programming that we do have been working with them somewhat in their after school, but it's definitely something we could look at.
I definitely think that provides a wonderful opportunity, especially as we look at this data and likely additional data that will come through and the impact that summer has on FAST scores and actually overall academic achievement. So definitely something to think about. And I think I forgot my second question, so I think that's it.
And I do know we've had initial conversations around, with Susie Guest, around our Jumpstart program and how could we do this differently than for our incoming kindergartners. It was our elementaries use it as a transition into kindergarten, and how could we see this as an opportunity to really rethink some current or existing programs that we have and make it, get higher leverage. So that's one program we just talked about last week, about re-examining that, and I'm sure others.
Mm-hmm. So I remember my second question. So, and this is probably more a Tom question. So, especially with the work that Allison is doing with community-based programs and partners, I don't know who the 12 elementary schools are that are receiving intense support, but again, trying to figure out ways that we create stronger alignment through community-based programs and partners that also provide that additional support that could yield some really positive outcomes for students, not only in the out-of-school time during the school year, but also during the summertime as well.
Yeah, that's a great point, Terry. We have been intentionally working with our community partners through that serve us through the 21st Century Community Learning Centers programs. We have additional work to do now with the implementation of the EL curriculum. So we have some alignment work that's underway now that we still have a long way to go on. One of the, and I can't tell you the percentage of the 12 intensive support schools that have 21st Century Learning Community programs, although one wall that we're bumping up against is that those federal dollars we're only able to renew those for a certain number of years at any one specific site, and we're running out of years at some of the schools where we would most prefer to have those programs. So we're trying to creatively look at how can we maintain that programming even when those specific grant funds go away. So that's one of one of the challenges in front of us.
Mm-hmm. I definitely think there's some opportunity there. So
absolutely.
Absolutely. Any other questions or discussion, Ms. Sawyer? Oh, Mr. Barron.
Two things. One, procedurally for Tom, getting back to the evaluation. So based on that criteria, then our next goal report is in 2 weeks on black male algebra. It'll be the first one that we will have received. Is it fair to assume there will be no evaluation on that one?
I think that there will be no evaluation on that. We've started working on that new nomenclature, but I'm not sure that I'll be in a position to have that vetted well with the board and have that in place by the time we have to post that report in about a week.
That's fine. I just want to make sure that the board's aware of that. And then then on February 4th, we would have our second SEL report, which is a little different.
Right.
And then on the 18th, we would have the second black male reading report and then the second early reading report. And is that when you would probably anticipate having
yes.
Evaluations attached to these?
Yeah.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And then one thought just comes to mind, continuing to think about this effect from the end of a school year to the beginning of a school year. As I sit here as a board member for the next couple of years, evaluating the progress towards meeting this goal and looking ahead, the numbers that you plot out assume that though it's a different cohort of students, that at the end of one year, the percent proficient will be identical at the beginning of the next year. And I understand it's a different cohort, but I guess my question is, you all are in this game much more intensely than I am. Are there examples of districts where that can be expected, where there isn't necessarily a drop from 1 year, from the end of one school year to the beginning of the next? Are we setting ourselves up appropriately by anticipating? So, from understanding that it's different cohorts, but saying that, we'll end The anticipation is that we'll end this academic year with 56.1% of our third grade students meeting the benchmark.
Mhm.
And that at the beginning of fall of 2020, 56.1% of our students will be meeting benchmark. Is there history? Are there examples of other districts where that would be the case? And so is that a fair goal for us to have?
I think that the fall target is not a fair goal. I think it's there really as a marker for us. I think the end of the year, I want to be very clear, this is very much a stretch goal for the system for us to hit those targets by the end of this goal period. I do think that it's a stretch, but I think we can get there. I don't have confidence that the fall measures that we've put out there are going to be accurate, because there just aren't examples, certainly not examples in districts anywhere similar to ours in terms of demographics where there's not some significant fall off from spring to fall at every grade level to some degree.
And I think
If I'm following your question correctly.
you're going to typically see some summer learning loss.
Yep. And
for
if you
a
look,
percentage of students or some students or, all students, but ours is significant. And that isn't contributed just to summer. There is some, not the automaticity and that real mastery of skill. So the hope is, as we continue to increase those spring scores, we may fall back 1 or 2 points, but we're gonna keep moving forward. So that's really what when you think about that growth, you may fall back a little bit in the fall, and many places do that because you do have that summer learning loss, but you get it up high enough and you don't have double-digit decreases, then you move towards your goal.
Yeah, so some of the work in front of us is analyzing our student scoring on the FAST and having a predictive measure of where does a student need to be at the end of a year in each grade level to still come in at not needing, not at risk that following fall. And we don't have that defined yet, but that's part of how we're analyzing the data.
I appreciate that. And yeah, and I have the benefit of looking at this stuff for an hour here and thinking about it. And so when I, just to be fair to you also, if you looked at the cohort of kindergartners ending this year, you project a little bit of a drop when they take the fall assessment as first graders next year. And I think that makes sense. The thing that I'm just trying to think about as we, as a board, sit here and evaluate progress towards this goal is, are we setting the appropriate and fair expectations? And these are your numbers, so I that's your province, but it's just something that where if there's outside data that supports it, that's valuable for us to know. I'm good.
Yeah, so really what these numbers reflect is trying to set where we need to be each year in the spring benchmark, and then trying to make our best guess backward mapping at the winter and fall. So it's that part certainly is not rocket science, but just our best guess.
Ms. Sawyer?
Thank you. So I just want to clarify, did you say that the EL curriculum is not currently implemented in all kindergarten or all schools at this time, but they have the curriculum and they're working towards implementation?
Their schools are implementing it at different, rates. You're going to see some that hit the ground running at the very beginning and they're on pace, and then others that just because of implementation curve has taken some longer time, but they all have it. And this year, it was our year to kind of work through that implementation and figure out how they were going to support that in the building and how we were going to support buildings.
So it's being implemented across the board, but what implementation looks like building by building, even classroom by classroom, will look a little bit different than it will next year once everyone's had a chance to work with it and go through the 4 learning cycles with it.
So will we expect that by next fall, it will be fully implemented throughout the district? Or
Well, you could say it's fully implemented right now. But it's just a rockier road since it's new materials and significantly a different approach in each classroom, if that makes sense.
could you foresee different outcomes from kids based
Oh,
on
yeah.
that curriculum?
Oh,
And would
yeah.
you be able to decipher out the data to look at maybe areas or schools where it, they're fully implementing versus those that are working towards?
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Any other discussion or questions? All right, thank you. We have a motion by Mr. Barron and a second by Ms. Bradley. Even though there's no evaluation, I think we do need to still vote to approve acceptance.
Just acceptance, yeah.
We're just accepting, yep, the monitoring report that it did indeed get turned in. So go ahead and please vote.
I
Ms.
vote yes to accept.
Thanks, Terry. All right, the vote is approved 7-0. Next up, we have just a couple information items. You'll see that there's some preliminary plans for various school improvement projects, a demographic survey, and also our state assessments report you'll see in there. And I just want to highlight for everyone, this is much later in the year than we typically see these, and that's predominantly because the results, I believe, came in, was it December, Dr. Ahart, or November?
November.
November.
Yeah, late
So,
November, yeah.
normally we'll see these, at a different time of year, but we'll see what happens this year. So, next up, we have items of privilege, and I just have a couple things. I wanted to provide a little bit of an update for the public that over the last weekend, the school board had the opportunity to engage in a work session and a workshop with AJ Craybill. And Mr. Craybill is a board governance expert and coach. He volunteers his time and he travels across the country to work with school boards. He is he used to serve on a school board within Kansas City. He currently works, I believe, with the Texas Board of Education. And our board was able to engage in learning surrounding our continued development on our monitoring process, as well as, we had a little bit of a discussion about our monitoring evaluations, and board members also received training on best practices for board communication on Sunday. I just want to thank everybody, all of my board colleagues, for the time that they spent working diligently in order to become better board members and also just better public servants to the owners of our district. I felt like it was time that was really well spent together and that we really kind of got a lot out of our time. And I just want to ensure that, that I appreciate you all. And not only do I appreciate you, but I know that our community really appreciates the work that we did. And then for the public, this is our first board meeting for the year, so I just want to welcome back our staff and students. I know I've been really grateful for a more mild weather for our bus drivers and the ease, kind of transportation, getting kids to and from school and, across the district. And as we wrap up kind of this first semester and get back into school for the second, I just want to thank our teachers for your continued instruction and guidance of our students and the work that you do with the kids inside the classroom, but also I know the time that it takes you outside the classroom, as we kind of talked a little bit about curriculum implementation and how all of that breaks down for you, that does definitely not go unnoticed by your board. So I know that you often, can make a few sacrifices so that our students have the absolute best experience. And, we do definitely appreciate that and hope that you got some good time with your family to rest and, take care of yourself over break, and that you continue to find those moments throughout the next semester to continue to take care of yourselves. So, do any other board members have comments they'd like to share at this time?
Madam Chair, I have one, excuse me, one quick thing.
Yes.
That I'm hoping that we might consider during our budget deliberations or presentation. Typically, on each board agenda, we have public hearings for a variety of projects that we're undertaking, but we also, not every meeting, but on lots of meeting agendas, we have under information only the preliminary plans for various school improvement projects, all of which are funded by the statewide penny in combination sometimes with Pebble and maybe other funding streams for capital improvement. And I'm wondering if there would be an opportunity, especially in light of the fact that we have, excuse me, a couple of new board members, and likely the rest of us could use a refresher. But if there's an opportunity for us to maybe do or spend a little bit of time on the 5-year capital plan, and to really help us better understand sort of what that is and how that factors into some of the bigger picture decisions that we're going to be asked to make relative to capital projects.
Yes, I made a note of it, and we'll be sure, Dwana and I will discuss with Tom about ways that we can work that into our work sessions coming up.
Thank you.
Yes. If the board members have no other comments, I'll turn it over to Dr. Ahart for the superintendent's report.
I want to echo Ms. Delgardell's comments about wishing everyone a happy new year, and hopefully all of our staff and students got some restful relaxation and reflection time over what was not the longest break that we've ever had. Coming back on Thursday, I know it was a tough one, coming back on the 2nd. But remember that this calendar is a little bit different this year, and so we do have some breaks built in between each quarter, and then a professional development day about halfway through each of those learning cycle focused quarters. So we do have that to look forward to. Want to mention that we have another public forum on the proposed community stadium project. The last one scheduled is tomorrow night at Hoyt Middle School at 6 p.m. And I also just want to express my appreciation to the East High School Alumni Foundation. There wasn't a price tag, I don't think, listed on the agenda item tonight, but there have been there's been one anonymous donor involved with the Alumni Foundation at East who's made a very generous donation of about $500,000, and with another one forthcoming probably before the end of this fiscal year to accelerate some improvements at the large East High School athletic complex, which, by the way, tonight the board approved the authorization of our purchase for free of the now vacated Fremont Avenue between East 14th and East 15th. So that will allow us a much larger uninterrupted property between Hyatt Middle School and East High School, actually the Walker Street building, if you've ever been by there. That's going to provide some nice opportunities for outdoor activity improvements for our students. That's all I have.
All right, great.
I'm sorry.
No, that's
to be
okay.
out of
Go ahead.
order, but I just want to also remind people about the CLAP meeting that will be taking place this Saturday at 10 a.m. at Brubaker Elementary School.
At
I'm sorry.
9 o'clock.
It's at Brubaker.
I know where it's at, but nowhere can I find who you're inviting so that as parents, we can be contacting them also, because there were empty chairs last time. And I don't know if it was just those people that I should be contacting. I can't find who you invite so that we can back you up.
I will go ahead and someone will touch base with you afterwards, and we'll invite you to join our CLAP planning committee if you would like to help us with some of that work. So, okay, well, give me just a second. I'll adjourn the meeting and we'll touch base with you in just a second, okay? Board members, if you do not have any further, the meeting is adjourned.